Here's my alternative brain figure. This is so great. This is the red X, and see, the red X is causing activations all throughout the brain. These are brain circuits, okay? And what I've tried to do is give you a sense of what those different circuits are doing in psychological terms. Some circuits are releasing stress hormones via the hypothalamus, starting point of the HPA axis that you've been learning about. Some are modulating physiological arousal. Some are modulating effortful emotion regulation, like in the prefrontal cortex, and so forth. These are all things that sort of come online during the alone condition. Okay? And one of the points that I want you to really internalize is that when you are under threat, now remember, the threat here is just a red X. It's not complicated. And yet, your brain perceives a large diversity of problems that it has to solve. It has to solve the problem of paying attention to where the threat might happen on your ankle. And it does that with a structure called the right anterior insula, right here. That's what that's doing. It has to keep you from screaming and trying to get out of the scanner, because that would be very embarrassing. So that's an emotion regulation task, a self-regulation task. So that's happening up in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex with effortful emotion regulation. It has to look for escape routes or seek out an attachment figure, which is a sort of, in cognitive neuroscience, sort of radical suggestion. Nucleus accumbens. It also has to prepare large muscles and joints for action. All of these different things are problems that the brain has to solve, even in a very simple threat task. Of course, most of our life is pretty complicated by comparison. So our brains have a lot to do, and it's constantly doing it, and it's doing most of it outside of our awareness. That's something that's a very important sort of concept for you to think about. Now, I've changed certain of these things to blue. Some of you might not be able to see them in the back because they're low down. I'm sorry about that. But what I want to tell you is that when you're holding even a stranger's hand, any hand, while you're under threat of shock, was associated in this first study with downregulation in circuits of the brain that modulate physiological arousal and bodily preparedness. The presence of anybody seems to be better than the presence of nobody for most people. Okay? And there are probably very excellent reasons for that. Here's the sort of array of structures that were downregulated or less active when you were holding your partner's hand. Suddenly, not only are you not as active in regions that modulate arousal and physiological agitation, but also in regions that regulate your emotion. Here we're seeing, for the first time, that the structures in your brain that are responsible for self-regulation are simply not active when you're under threat of shock while you're holding your partner's hand. This was surprising. In fact, although now I'm very happy with these results, when I first saw this, I regarded them as somewhat of a failure. Of course, relationship quality, as George Bailey can tell us, matters a lot. If you're thinking like a cognitive neuroscientist so far, and I don't recommend it, you are thinking in terms of what cognitive neuroscientists frequently call the down-regulation model. This is a story where all of these systems, the threat matrix that we described in the alone condition, becomes active, right? And then somehow introducing people down-regulates those things. This is how cognitive neuroscientists are trained to think. I would argue that my colleagues and I, most of psychology, most of clinical psychology, has been suffering for a long time from a figure ground problem. Okay? They've been looking at this figure and seeing the vase or candlestick or whatever it is, not the two faces looking at each other. That in fact, the assumption of the baseline situation is the individual is not respecting human ecology. We evolved over millennia in a social ecology. Our brains are designed to assume that ecology is there, in much the same way that fish are designed to assume water is there. Okay? And if we violate this assumption, we are getting people doing, strictly speaking, what they're capable of, but we're not getting them in their social environment, in their ecology. This has, as you might guess, major implications for experimental psychology and for psychotherapy. Why are we even seeing people individually in therapy? What the heck? Note the... All right, here's how it looks, this social baseline model. We're going to contrast this with the downregulation model. Here we have the presence of a threat, the presence of a relational partner in a high-quality relationship. It's not that problems B, C, and D are downregulated. They're just not being upregulated, because the only problem that's perceived in that ecology is problem A. Now, if the relationship is less spectacular, then that is sort of synonymous with saying, it's synonymous with saying you have more problems you have to solve on your own. So problem B pops up. It's a little more effortful. You're conserving less energy. If you're with a stranger, that person's an unknown quantity, problem C pops up. You have more that you have to do on your own. And of course, if you're alone, all of these problems must be solved by yourself. So there's an enormous ontogenetic pressure to not be alone.